and welcome to No Fear Line Editing, your path to polished prose. Thank you to Fiction Marketing Academy for letting Pro Writing Aid be here to talk to you about one of the hardest parts of writing a book, one of these final steps of line editing. My name is Krystal Craiker, and I am an indie romance author, a content writer, a part-time editor and proofreader, and I'm also the partnership coordinator at Pro Writing Aid, which allows me the opportunity to work with great companies and events like Fiction Marketing Academy. Today, we're going to cover a lot of information. First of all, we're going to talk about what is line editing and editing for style and clarity, editing for engagement and diction, editing for flow, and how to use Pro Writing Aid. What I'm going to do is go through a systematic approach to line editing so that you don't feel as overwhelmed going line by line to improve your manuscript, or find yourself asking, what am I supposed to even be doing? What am I supposed to be improving? So what I'll give you today is a framework, a 3x3 framework that you can use to help you line edit. There are several stages of editing, and depending on who you ask, there's anywhere from 2 to 5. I use a 4-step stage of editing because honestly, that's what my editor uses when pricing. So for when pricing their work. So I use this 4 steps of editing. And what each of these mean are: developmental editing is where you're taking a look at your manuscript as a whole. Okay, this is where you figure out your plot issues, your characterization, your conflict, all of these editing things where you may need to remove plot lines or characters or add something. All right, content is taking a slightly smaller approach and looking at the structure of scenes and story arcs individually. Line editing is where you go line by line to improve the actual prose of your document, of your manuscript. And finally, proofreading is things like spelling, grammar, consistency, issues like that. Some people combine line and proofreading into something called copy editing. It's all essentially the same thing. You can use the same method if you take that approach, just edit for spelling and grammar as you go. Personally, I find that to be a separate step because when you're line editing, you may end up changing several pieces of your story as you go, and then you've got to edit for spelling and grammar for what you've already changed. So if you do proofreading along with your line editing, you often make more work for yourself. So how can you approach line editing in a systematic way? And there are 3 big categories that I'm going to cover today. The first is style and clarity. The second is engagement and diction. And finally, there's pacing and flow. Within each of these 3 categories, there are 3 different things to look for. All right. If you can look for these 9 things as you edit, you're going to clean up your manuscript drastically, and it's going to be very polished and ready for a proofread. So we'll look at passive writing and what that includes, glue words, what those are, and your reading ease. We'll look at the use of power verbs, sensory detail, and dialogue tags. And finally, we'll look at sentence variety, repeat words, and your overall pacing of your prose, not the pacing of your story, but within paragraphs and lines themselves. Let's start with style and clarity. This is a great place to start when you're editing. So passive writing includes a few things. It includes passive voice, which is where you take the true subject of your sentence and make it the object of your sentence. And it becomes slower, messier, harder to read. Hidden verbs are where you use a noun form of a verb rather than the actual verb, which makes your writing stronger. So these hidden verbs can weaken our writing, slow it down, although you can use these both for emphasis in certain situations. So an example of passive voice is she was pursued by zombies. That's one of those little tricks is your sentence is in passive voice if you can insert by zombies at the end. The zombies are doing the pursuing. All right, so zombies pursued her. Now, we'll talk about some occasions where you might want to use passive voice, but in general, you want to flip this to be a more active sentence. He made a declaration. You can see that we have the verb declare hidden in this word. He declared. We've gotten rid of some of these small words and cleaned it up and used more action in our writing. So when can you use passive voice? When the subject is unknown. Stonehenge was built around 5,000 years ago, or if you're writing a fiction book and you have some, grand fortress that was built long ago. When the subject is irrelevant, the time and life building was constructed in 1959 and changed the skyline. It doesn't matter who constructed it because that's not the point. It's about how it changed the skyline in 1959. And when it's a stylistic choice. So Mary realized a suspicious, that should say package, had been left at her door. The focus here is on Mary and the suspicious package, not on the person who left it at her door, who is unknown. So in this case, we don't need to say someone left a suspicious package at Mary's door. Mary and the package are the emphasis. So let's edit. Let's look at a sample piece of fiction and find some changes that we can make to clean up our passive writing. Deep in the catacombs, the ancient manuscript was finally found by the young archaeologist. Long ago, she had made a promise to her old professor that she would not find any rest until this papyrus document was found. So let's change it up. So here, let me go back. We've got passive voice and we've got some hidden verbs here. So we can change this up a little bit. I have left passive voice in this first example here because the emphasis is on the papyrus document, or we can change that last sentence. So we can say, deep in the catacombs, the young archaeologist had finally found the ancient manuscript. So we've gotten rid of that passive voice. Long ago, she had promised her old professor that she would not rest until this papyrus document was found. All right. Or we can say that she would not rest until she found this papyrus document. What this does is it puts more action and activeness into your writing. You can easily fix this with the Pro Writing Aid style report. Or our real-time report is going to automatically flag passive verbs, and the style report is going to find hidden verbs for you as well. Glue words. So you don't have to be a grammar expert to be a good writer. I truly, honestly believe that. But what you do have to have is a basic knowledge of parts of sentences, all right? And that includes the working words and the glue words. Working words are the most essential part of a sentence. And glue words are the right words that stick these working words together. Too many glue words slow down your writing, making it clunky and harder to read. All right, so deep in the catacombs, the ancient manuscript was finally found by the young archaeologist. Long ago, she had made a promise to her old professor that she would not find any rest until this papyrus document was found. What I've done here is highlighted the working words. Everything else is glue words. So let's try to clear some of these up. A lot of times we get rid of glue words automatically when we edit for active writing. So when we've gotten rid of this passive voice and hidden verbs, we've actually gotten rid of several of these small words. All right, so deep in the catacombs, the young archaeologist found the ancient manuscript. We don't need was and finally and by. Long ago, she promised her old professor that she wouldn't rest until she found this papyrus document. You can see how much shorter we've made this. We have far fewer glue words, which makes our writing much more engaging to read. You can fix this with Pro Writing Aid. We have a sticky sentences report, and this is going to identify sentences where you have used too many glue words, and that will help you cut them down. Our final part of style and clarity is readability. Readability is how easy something is to read. Okay. Now, most readers are reading fiction for escapism and entertainment. They don't want to work too hard at it. This doesn't mean that you need to dumb down the ideas in your writing at all, but it does mean that you often want to choose simpler language and simpler sentence structure to get your ideas across better. Because what you're really trying to get across are the ideas in your story, the theme, the message, the plot. You don't have to use flowery, wordy language for that. Some factors that affect readability include word choice, sentence structure and length, passive versus active voice, glue words, and jargon. All right. You probably won't be using much jargon in your fiction, but these other things do affect the readability. As you can see, we've already covered glue words and active voice, and we'll talk more about sentence structure and length later on. But in general, if you are using too many long, complex sentences, the readability is going to be affected. If you're using too many flowery words, your readability is going to be affected. That doesn't mean that you can't use them. It means be choosy and intersperse them with simpler language and simpler sentences to enhance the overall readability of your document. So the ideas are the stars in your writing. Readable writing lets your ideas shine. Be choosy about your interesting words. And every audience is different. Consider yours carefully when targeting readability. If you are writing an epic fantasy novel, your readers expect more complex writing than if you're writing, say, a contemporary romance. Okay, so that does matter, but you should still be aiming within those genre conventions. You should still be aiming for readability. You can run a readability check. This is a screenshot from our tool. The average American can read with ease a readability grade of 8. Consider your genre conventions, but overall work for readability around grade 8. That does not mean, again, that you have to make your ideas and your content appropriate for an eighth grader, which is around age 13. It just means that the ease of your writing should be readable to someone who can comfortably read at an eighth grade level. So here is an example of our readability report, and it's going to find hard to read paragraphs, and it's going to say what is making it harder to read, the sentence length here. But this is shaping up to be a pretty epic fantasy novel. I'm going to say my sentence length could come down a little bit, but not too much. And you do want to consider this as a scene as a whole, not just paragraph by paragraph. All right, our second major category is engagement and diction or word choice. So you want to edit to make your writing as engaging as possible and using the best words to do that. I'm going to talk a lot about power verbs from now until several sections from now because they are very, very important. Writing is easier to visualize when you use verbs. Power verbs aren't just action verbs, they're strong, engaging verbs. And we'll go through some examples here soon. Strong verbs keep your story moving. A really great power verb will eliminate the need for an adverb altogether. Replace as many adverbs and even adjectives as possible with power verbs. That doesn't mean you have to get rid of all of them, and adjectives are just as necessary for setting the scene. But a really great power verb can pull your reader into your scene a lot more, and it will keep your story moving. Okay, you've heard that adverbs are not good in writing. They serve a purpose, and there are different categories of adverbs, and some are just fine. But a lot of those adverbs that end in ly, what they do is they just tell your reader something and they don't show it. So if you want your readers engaged with your writing, you need to replace as many adverbs as possible with power verbs. So let's look at some ideas of some power verbs. Normally, when I do this live, I have everyone participate here. But think of some stronger words than found, discovered, unearthed, walked. Walked is pretty vague. So we often fall into using these adverbs here. But what does walked angrily look like? Do they stomp? Do they stalk? Walk sadly? Do they what do they do to walk sadly? Do they slump their shoulders? Do they shuffle their feet? Walked slowly. Walked slowly doesn't have a mood with it. We need to set the tone using the right verb. Do they slink in a flirty way? Do they shuffle or stumble? You can do the same exercise with look longingly. So you might gaze instead. Look blankly, stare. Sensory detail. Sensory detail is using the 5 sentences to bring your story to life. All right, you've heard about using the 5 sentences in your writing. We often rely on sight and feel too heavily because those are the easiest. We're seeing it on our mind, and we may even be feeling what the character feels. So we rely on those too heavily. But you have other senses. You have smell, taste, and hearing. You also have a 6th sense called interoception, which is the internal sensations. So you might say there's 6 senses. A well-rounded scene will use at least 3 of the 5 senses, minimally. All right. And that doesn't mean just once. That means throughout your scene, using at least 3 of the 5 senses. I call this the 3D method. And don't forget about internal sensations, like I mentioned. Power verbs are a great way to add sensory detail. Instead of hearing the bells ring, you might hear chiming. Okay. So let's go back to this piece and edit. Deep in the catacombs, the young archaeologist found the ancient manuscript. Long ago, she promised her old professor that she wouldn't rest until she found this papyrus document. The papyrus manuscript was crinkly and fragile. The ink was hard to read. The air in the catacombs was cold and damp. Deborah wondered how the document had been preserved for millennia. So we've got a good start here, but we have sight, right? We have crinkly, fragile, hard to read. We've got feel, cold and damp. How can we change this up? So you might say that Deborah shivered, right? That's going to give us a power verb and some sensory detail. She shivered in the cold, damp air. The ink was faded. What does the papyrus manuscript sound like? Does it sound like crinkling paper, or do we just want to say it was crinkly? What does it smell like? Now let's talk about dialogue tags versus action beats. Dialogue tags are the exception to the power verbs rule. All right. In general, you don't want to use special words for said or asked because said and asked become invisible to the reader. But we often fall into this trap of using adverbs with our dialogue tags. And we don't want to do that either because it's not really adding anything to our story. An action beat, which is a statement of what is happening between dialogue. An action beat allows you to add action, sensory detail, world building, characterization, and more. I call action beats the author's multi-tool because in one sentence, you can add so much rather than just saying, she said. So here we have an unusual dialogue tag. It must be magic, Deborah mused. Deborah's eyes widened. This is an action beat. We can see her eyes widening now. We can feel it as if we are Deborah ourselves. It must be magic. It must be magic. Deborah rubbed at the goosebumps on her arms. So now we've taken away needing to say the air was cold and damp and telling it, and we show it. Deborah ran a hand through her dark brown hair, thinking, it must be magic. All right, so now we have that she has dark brown hair, we know a little bit more about Deborah and what some of her tics are, running a hand through her hair while she thinks. Pacing and flow is our third major category. I know this is a text-heavy slide, but this is a quote from Gary Provost that I just love, and I think it's really captures the importance of sentence variety. This sentence has 5 words. Here are 5 more words. 5-word sentences are fine, but several together become monotonous. Listen to what is happening. The writing is getting boring. The sound of it drones. It's like a stuck record. The ear demands some variety. Now listen. I vary the sentence length and I create music. Music. The writing sings. It has a pleasant rhythm, a lilt, a harmony. I use short sentences, and I use sentences of medium length. And sometimes, when I am certain the reader is rested, I will engage him with a sentence of considerable length, a sentence that burns with energy and builds with all the impetus of a crescendo, the roll of the drums, the crash of the cymbals, sounds that say, listen to this, it is important. I love this quote. It gives me goosebumps every time I read it. And Gary Provost captures how just changing and varying the length of your sentences can add so much to your writing to engage your reader. So, again, you don't need to be a grammar expert, but it is helpful to know that there are 4 basic sentence types. Simple sentences have subject and verb, and maybe a little extra, but subject verb is the structure. A compound sentence combines 2 simple sentences, either with a conjunction, like and or but, or with punctuation, like an em dash or a semicolon. A complex sentence is a sentence with a dependent clause and an independent clause, or a clause that can stand alone and one that cannot. So it needs at least one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses to be a complex sentence. And a compound complex sentence combines at least 2 independent clauses with one or more dependent clause. Ways you can vary these are to change up the sentence structures. You can start with a dependent clause, a gerund, which is when we use an ing verb, kind of like a noun. So panting, he ran across the catacombs. Okay, panting would be a gerund. An infinitive, to plus a verb is an infinitive. To see what Deborah saw was amazing. You can use colons and dashes and semicolons to connect sentences so that you are really changing up the overall flow of your sentences. So let's edit for this. The papyrus manuscript was fragile and crinkled beneath her fingers. The air was cold. She shivered as she squinted at the faded ink. Deborah wondered how the document had been preserved for millennia. She ran her fingers through her thick dark hair, musing it must be magic. As you can see here, we have subject and verb, and often just a weak verb. So subject, the manuscript was, the air was, she shivered, Deborah wondered. That's very, very repetitive, even though the length of our sentences are different. So let's change it up. The papyrus manuscript was fragile and crinkled beneath her fingers. As she shivered in the cold air, we've added a dependent clause here, she squinted at the faded ink. Deborah wondered how the document had been preserved for millennia. Musing, she ran her fingers through her thick dark hair. We've taken that gerund and added it to the beginning of the sentence. It must be magic. And isn't it magic to just change up your sentences and improve a document so quickly? This is another thing you can fix with Pro Writing Aid by running the sentence structure check. And it will analyze how many sentences start in all these different ways, whether with a subject, with an infinitive, with a gerund, with a dependent clause. Repeated words come in a few categories that we use at Pro Writing Aid. So overused words include your own overused words and those compared to published works. All right. You want to be different. Repeats are the words and phrases you use often. Then those may be 4 or 5 sentence phrases. Okay. Do your characters nod a lot? That would be a repeat. Echoes are words and phrases that are in close proximity. Maybe you have used the same adjective 3 times in one scene. You can probably change that up a little bit. So that's an echo. There are reports for all of these on Pro Writing Aid. So let's edit. Deep in the damp, dark catacombs, the young archaeologist discovered the ancient manuscript. Long ago, she promised her old professor that she wouldn't rest until she found this papyrus document. The papyrus manuscript was fragile and crinkled beneath her fingers. The air was cold. She shivered as she squinted at the faded ink. Deborah wondered how the document had been preserved for millennia. Musing, she ran her fingers through her thick, dark hair. I've highlighted some repeats here. I've used dark twice, really close to each other, some echoes. I've used manuscript twice and papyrus. All right, and I've used the phrase her fingers. So what can we get rid of? We noted that it's an ancient manuscript. We can get rid of papyrus here and manuscript here. Just say document and papyrus separately. They stand alone. How can we change her fingers? Sat at her touch. All right. And let's give her an actual hair color instead of dark to change up that. So now we have gotten rid of our echoes here. Paragraph pacing is too many long sentences in a row, which will slow down your pacing, or too many short sentences, speed it up. You want to match the pacing of your paragraphs to the scene. So if you're writing an action scene, you want shorter sentences and shorter paragraphs. If it's a transition scene, if it's a very emotional scene, you want to slow it down with more longer sentences, and longer paragraphs. You can run the pacing report for an analysis of how well your paragraphs are paced. It may be something that you need to change, and it may be something that you realize, hey, I'm right on target with what this scene needs to accomplish. That's a lot to cover. All right. We've covered 9 different things, and they are covered in several different reports on Pro Writing Aid. But if you use Pro Writing Aid, you get access to the combo report, which is a really great tool to make your editing more efficient. The best Pro Writing Aid reports, in my humble opinion, for line editing that cover what we've covered today include the overused words, repeats, echoes, pacing, writing style, sticky sentences, readability, dialogue tags, complex words, and the sensory report. There are others in here if you struggle with the length of your paragraphs, consistency, word choice. You can add and take away whatever you want, but you can find this under your settings. And then all you do after you've saved this is hit combo report, and it's going to look for all of these at once. Then you truly can go line by line through your writing and see what you need to fix, what is perfect and needs to stay just out how it is, and helps you polish your prose. So let's do a quick recap of the 3x3 method, the 3 categories with 3 things in each that you want to edit. First, there's style and clarity. That includes passive writing, glue words, and reading ease. Then there's engagement and diction, which includes power verbs, sensory detail, and dialogue tags. And then there's pacing and flow, which includes sentence variety, repeat words, and prose pacing. If you can use these like a checklist and use the combo report in Pro Writing Aid to help you, you will polish your manuscript to a point that it really is ready to go either to your final editor or to the proofreading stage. Thank you so much for having me. Again, I'm Krystal Craiker with Pro Writing Aid.